Lena's body was found at 6:47 in the morning. Not by the police, not by a family member, but by Cassie, her twin sister, who woke up from a nightmare so real she could taste dirt in her mouth before she even opened her eyes. She didn't know what had happened yet, but her body knew. While Cassie ran barefoot down the apartment hallway calling her sister's name, on the other side of the city, in a mansion with a lit-up pool and glass walls, Renata Voss was taking a shower that lasted too long. Hot water, thick steam, as if she could wash something that wasn't on her skin. No one would call the police that night. That was her decision. 3 months earlier, Lena Soares had just secured her first full university scholarship. She was the first in her family to get into a real private college, the kind that shows up in rankings with modern labs and professors who give lectures abroad. Her mother cried in the kitchen when the letter arrived, cried on her knees with her hands over her face because that kind of joy doesn't fit standing up. Lena was intelligent in a way that unsettled people who didn't know how to recognize talent. She wasn't arrogant, never was. She just saw connections where others saw chaos, solved problems in silence, and rarely needed to ask for help. She had the kind of mind that makes professors stop mid-explanation to think. But getting into the right college doesn't mean entering the right world. Renata Voss and Isadora Mell were the gravitational center of the campus. Not elected, not declared. They simply were. Renata had the last name, the penthouse, and that way of looking at someone as if deciding whether they deserved to exist in the same space as her. Isadora was different, softer on the surface, more calculating underneath. She knew exactly what to say to make someone feel chosen, and that's exactly what she did with Lena. The friendship began in such a common way that it's almost painful to tell. A group project, a laugh in the hallway, an invitation to lunch. Small gestures that, for Lena, meant belonging. For Isadora, they meant usefulness. Lena started making summaries that became study material for the entire group. She revised presentations at 2 in the morning, explained calculus with the patience of a private tutor. And in return, she received invitations to parties, mentions in stories, the pleasure of being seen next to those everyone wanted to be around. Cassie watched all of this from a distance and felt something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't jealousy. It was that specific feeling you get when you watch someone you love walk towards something without realizing the ground is sinking beneath their feet. The twins talked every day, but Lena had started filtering what she shared. Small omissions, stories that ended too soon. Cassie noticed the blank spaces, but didn't know how to fill them without seeming like she was questioning her sister's relationship. She should have insisted. That kind of guilt doesn't go away easily. The party at Renata's mansion took place on a Friday in October. Lena didn't want to go. She texted Cassie saying she was tired, that she was going to sleep early. Cassie replied with a heart emoji and went to bed without worry. What Lena didn't say is that Isadora had called at 10 p.m. saying it was important, that everyone would be there. That it would be strange if she didn't go. There are pressures that don't arrive as threats. They arrive as invitations, as affection, as fear disguised as normality. Lena grabbed her coat and went. Inside the mansion, the night began like all the others. Music, dim lights, that kind of conversation that feels deep when you're tired. But at some point, in a corner of the room, someone handed Lena something with a smile, as if it were natural, as if refusing was what needed explanation. She hesitated, and that hesitation was the last conscious decision Lena Soares made in her life. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. And tell me in the comments what you think so far, and which city or country you're watching from. Cassie woke up at 3 a.m. for no apparent reason. It wasn't a noise. It wasn't a dream. It was that physical feeling of absence, like when you reach out in the dark expecting to find something solid and only find air. She lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, her heart beating at a rhythm that didn't match the silence of the room. She picked up her phone. No message from Lena. She sent a, "Are you okay?" with a question mark and placed the phone face down on the table. She closed her eyes. She couldn't fall asleep again. In the morning, the message was still unanswered. Lena had seen it at 11:14 p.m., and after that, nothing. No story, no sign of life online. For anyone else, that would be irrelevant. For Cassie, who knew her sister's habits better than her own, it was wrong in a way that was hard to explain. She called 4 times before breakfast. Voicemail all 4 times. On the other side of the city, Renata Voss was in her room with the door locked and her phone turned off. Isadora stood outside knocking for 20 minutes before Renata opened. When the door gave in, Isadora saw her friend's eyes and understood that the situation was more serious than she had allowed herself to admit during the night. "She's not going to wake up," Renata said. Not as a question. Isadora leaned against the wall, took a deep breath. Inside her, a war was happening that no one on the outside could see. She knew what was right. She knew the number she needed to dial. She knew that every minute that passed made everything more complicated, more irreversible, heavier. But Renata spoke before Isadora could organize her own thoughts. "If you call anyone, our lives end here. You know that." Isadora closed her eyes and stayed silent. That silence lasted the rest of her life. Renata had a plan before the sun even rose. There was a piece of land at the back of the family property, near a wooded area her father had never had cleared, a place no one visited, that never appeared in any promotional photos of the mansion, that the staff avoided because they said the soil was too damp. She knew that because she had grown up there. She knew every angle of the property, like someone who knows their own apartment with their eyes closed. What happened in the following hours, Isadora was never able to describe in a linear way. She remembered fragments, the cold texture of the stone floor, the weight her hands refused to acknowledge by name, Renata's rapid breathing contrasting with the absolute silence of the early morning, and a constant, uninterrupted feeling that she was doing the worst thing someone could do. She didn't stop. This is the kind of thing she would carry forever, even if she never admitted it to anyone. Renata Voss was 19 years old and already understood something most people learn too late. Narrative is power. She wasn't stupid. Never was. She was the kind of person who calculates risk before feeling guilt, who thinks about consequences before thinking about responsibility. She grew up in an environment where problems were managed, not faced, where lawyers were called before tears, where the word scandal was more feared than the word wrong. For Renata, what had happened was a crisis management problem. Lena Soares was a scholarship student with no influential family, no connections, no one who could make enough noise to reach the places where the Voss name still protected. She was too calculating to feel regret in that moment, and that says everything about who she was. What she didn't calculate was Cassie. Cassie went to the police station on Monday morning. The clerk at the front desk had that look of someone who had heard too much and learned to conserve emotion. She explained that her sister had been missing since Friday night, that she wasn't answering her phone, that she wasn't the kind of person who disappeared without saying anything. The clerk said she needed to wait 72 hours. Cassie looked at him for a moment, then asked, with a calm that wasn't natural, where the Department for Missing Persons was. She didn't cry in front of anyone that day. She held everything in, turned pain into attention, every detail into data, every intuition into a question to be answered. She was identical to her sister in that way, and completely different in what she would do with it. As she left the station holding a report receipt and zero hope in the system, her phone vibrated with a notification. It was a photo of Isadora at a university event, smiling, new outfit, as if the weekend had been completely normal. Cassie saved the photo and started paying attention in a different way. Cassie hadn't been sleeping properly for 11 days. It wasn't insomnia in the clinical sense. It was a choice. She used the early morning hours to do what the daytime didn't allow. Research, take notes, connect dots that the police hadn't yet linked because technically there was still no confirmed crime. Her room had turned into something between an office and an altar. Photos of Lena on the wall, screenshots, names underlined, times, contradictions. Her mother knocked on the door sometimes and asked if she had eaten. Cassie said yes, even when it wasn't true. The pain of losing someone you're not yet allowed to call lost is a specific kind of suffering. It doesn't have a right name. It doesn't have a ritual. You can't hold awake. You can't cry with purpose. You can't close it. It stays suspended in that space between shock and grief. And you have to choose every morning whether you're going to freeze or act. Cassie chose to act. It was the only way to keep breathing. The first thing she discovered was small, almost insignificant. Isadora had posted a story on the night of the party. 17 seconds of music, lights, silhouettes dancing. Cassie watched it 40 times. Not for what appeared, but for what didn't. Lena should have been there. She had gone to that party. But at no moment, from any angle, in any reflection of mirror or glass, did Lena appear. That meant two things. Either Lena had left too early for any record, or someone had made sure she didn't appear. The second hypothesis took away what little sleep she had left. Cassie created a fake profile. Neutral photo, generic name, no connection to her or to Lena. She spent 3 days building that digital identity with the patience of someone who knows that haste destroys everything. She followed people from the campus, interacted with irrelevant posts, waited. When the profile seemed organic enough, she sent a message to a girl who appeared in several photos from the party. She said she was researching for a project about university culture and wanted to talk about private parties in the city. The girl replied in 20 minutes. They talked for almost an hour. The name that came up in that conversation wasn't Renata. It was another one, peripheral, someone who had been at the party and had left before midnight, commenting that the atmosphere had suddenly become heavy, that there had been some kind of incident in one of the upstairs bedrooms, that Renata had asked everyone to leave earlier than expected. No one found it strange at the time. Parties end. Hosts get tired. But Cassie wrote down the time, compared it with the location records she managed to partially reconstruct from other people's stories present there. There was a 40-minute window where the mansion simply disappeared from social media. No posts, no mentions, no digital noise. 40 minutes of collective silence at an event with more than 30 people is not a coincidence. It's coordination. It was on a Thursday afternoon that Cassie went to the mansion for the first time. Not to confront anyone. It wasn't time for that yet. She went to see the grounds with her own eyes, to understand the geography of the place, to feel what maps don't show. She parked far away, went on foot, stayed outside the gate long enough to understand what she needed to understand. And it was there, looking at the wooded area at the back of the property, that something inside her broke in a silent and definitive way. She didn't have proof yet, but she knew. The crying came there, leaning against a tree 200 meters from the mansion, alone, with no one to see. She cried like someone who finally named something the body already knew. Then she wiped her face, took a breath, and started planning for real. Cassie had an advantage Renata never considered. They were identical twins. Same height, same skin tone, same facial structure. Anyone who didn't know them closely needed context to tell them apart. Lena wore her hair looser. Cassie kept hers more tied back. Lena had a small tattoo on her left wrist. Details that are solved in seconds with a hair tie and a long sleeve. She stood in front of the mirror for an hour that night. She practiced her sister's way of walking. The slightly asymmetrical smile. The way Lena tilted her head when she was listening to someone carefully. These are things you only know when you've grown up next to someone, when you've shared a room, when you've spent years being compared to the same person until you learn every detail of them as an extension of yourself. It hurt. Every rehearsed gesture hurt in a new way. But she kept going, because Renata Voss needed to see Lena Soares' face one more time before being destroyed. and Cassie was going to make sure of that. The message arrived on a Tuesday at 9:03 p.m. Renata was in her campus apartment when her phone vibrated. Unknown number. No profile picture. Just one line. "I know what you did." She stood still for 40 seconds without blinking. Then she deleted the message, blocked the number, and went to the kitchen to get water, as if nothing had happened. But the hand holding the glass was slightly unsteady, and she noticed it and hated noticing it. She texted Isadora, "Someone knows. We need to talk." Isadora took 12 minutes to reply. When she did, it was just a question mark. Renata interpreted it as denial. Isadora was trying not to exist inside that subject, pretending that if she didn't talk about it, it wouldn't be real. Renata knew that mechanism. She herself had tried to use it in the first weeks. It didn't work. 3 days later, Isadora was leaving the library when she saw it. From behind, in the main hallway of the Humanities building, there was a figure wearing the moss green coat she recognized before she even processed the recognition. The posture, the way of holding the backpack on the left shoulder, the loose hair falling on one specific side. The blood drained from Isadora's face in a second. She stood frozen in the middle of the hallway with students passing her in every direction, completely still, while the figure turned the corner and disappeared. Isadora went after it, picked up her pace, then ran, reached the corner, and there was no one. Empty hallway. Exit door lightly swinging as if someone had just passed through. She leaned against the wall and stayed there for a few minutes, trying to convince herself it had been her imagination. It wasn't imagination. Cassie had studied that building for a week. She knew every exit, every camera, every movement schedule. She had chosen that hallway because Isadora passed through there every Tuesday and Thursday after the library. She had timed the appearance to last exactly long enough to be seen, but not reached. It was working. Renata was next. Cassie chose a different place for her. Not the campus, where Renata felt in control, where her last name still meant something. She chose the parking lot of the condominium where Renata lived at 10:40 p.m. on a weekday when she knew Renata would return alone from a dinner with her mother. She stood under a faulty lamp that flickered at irregular intervals. Renata saw her from a distance and stopped completely. For 4 seconds, there was no sound, no movement, just Renata staring at that figure lit by unstable light, her brain refusing what her eyes were telling her. Cassie slowly turned her face toward her. Renata dropped her keys. The metallic sound on the asphalt broke the silence, and also broke the control she had maintained for weeks. She bent down to pick up the keys with hands that didn't quite obey, got into the car, locked the doors, and sat in the dark for 20 minutes, unable to start the engine. That night, she called Isadora at 11:30, saying they needed to meet in person, that it was getting to her, that she was seeing things, that she couldn't take it anymore. Isadora listened to everything in silence, then said, "I saw it too." The meeting between the two happened at Isadora's apartment. Cassie already knew it would. She had placed a simple audio device, bought for 200 reis at an electronics store, under the table on the balcony where Isadora always received visitors. She had entered the apartment 2 days earlier using a copy of the key that Lena had kept in a drawer at home, which Cassie found during weeks of silent investigation. Every detail had been calculated. She stayed outside, in a car parked half a block away, with headphones on, listening. Renata spoke first. Her voice had a different quality, something cracked that Cassie had never heard before. She described what she had seen in the parking lot with a precision that revealed how deeply it had been etched into her memory. Isadora confirmed the library incident. The two stayed silent for a moment. Then Renata said, low but clear enough for the audio to capture, "This isn't possible. We buried her." Isadora didn't respond immediately. When she spoke, her voice was broken in a way that sounded like the first genuine thing she had expressed in weeks. "I knew it would end like this. I knew from the beginning." Cassie took off her headphones for a second, took a deep breath, then put them back on and waited for the full confession, every word, every detail she needed. When the audio fell silent, she already had enough to destroy them both, and she would do it the right way. The audio file was 43 minutes long. Cassie listened to it 3 full times before doing anything, not out of doubt, but because she needed to be sure that every second was preserved, that the quality was sufficient, that no detail would be questionable when it reached the right hands. She had learned in the past weeks that emotion without evidence moves no system. Pain without proof doesn't open a case. She couldn't go to the police station with feelings. She had to go with material. She transferred the audio to 3 different devices, sent it to an email created exclusively for this, with a password only she knew. She printed the full transcription she had spent the night typing, word for word, with timestamps marked. She slept for 2 hours. In the morning, she was at the police station at exactly 8. The detective who attended her this time was different from the front desk clerk from the first weeks. Older, more direct, with that look of someone who had seen a lot but hadn't yet learned to pretend he didn't. Cassie placed the material on the table with an organization that clearly surprised him. It wasn't the emotional chaos he probably expected from a desperate sister. It was a dossier, audio with a spontaneous confession, full transcription with markings, reconstructed timeline of the night of the party, digital records with timestamps, approximate location based on terrain analysis, full names of the 2 involved, addresses, family connections. The detective listened to the central portion of the audio right there, with Cassie sitting on the chair across the table, not showing anything on her face. When the audio ended, he stayed silent for a few seconds. Then he picked up the phone. Renata was taken into custody on a Thursday morning. She was leaving for a class when 2 officers appeared in the building hallway. She saw the badges and stood still for a moment with her backpack on her shoulder, as if her brain was trying to find a way out that no longer existed. It didn't. Isadora was detained 40 minutes later, on campus, outside the cafeteria. She didn't resist, didn't say anything. She got into the police car with that expression of someone who had already given up on something a long time ago. Maybe since that early morning when she stayed silent when she should have spoken. Lena's body was found exactly where the audio indicated. Forensics confirmed what Cassie already knew. The autopsy was clear. The cause of death, the circumstances, the attempt to conceal it, everything documented with a precision that made their defense practically impossible from the first day of the trial. The trial lasted 4 months. Cassie was present at every session. She always sat in the same chair, in the 3rd row, without lawyers by her side, without cameras, without anyone turning her pain into a performance. She listened to every testimony with the same attention she had used to build the dossier. When the prosecution played parts of the audio in court, she didn't look away. Renata was convicted. Isadora received a lighter sentence for cooperation during the process. But cooperation doesn't erase participation. She knew that. The judge made it clear that silence in the face of a crime is not neutrality. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with microphones and cameras. Cassie walked past all of them without stopping. She had no statement to give, no prepared line. She had a sister who deserved more than becoming a news headline. Weeks later, Cassie returned to the land at the back of the property. There was nothing there anymore except disturbed soil and forensic tape already worn by time. She stood there for a long time without doing anything specific. She didn't pray, didn't speak out loud. She just stayed. Sometimes presence is the only gesture that makes sense. Lena had gone to a party wanting to belong somewhere. That need to belong wasn't weakness. It was human. It was the same thing that makes people accept less than they deserve, stay in places that diminish them, smile when they should speak. There was nothing wrong with Lena. There was something deeply wrong with a world that confuses status with value and treats humble intelligence as a disposable resource. Cassie thought about that on the way back home. She thought about how much her sister had given without receiving the equivalent. how much she had been seen as an instrument by people who would never have half of what she had inside. And she thought that the only thing she could do now, besides having ensured justice, was to live in a way that honored everything Lena represented. Not as guilt, as a choice. Some stories don't end with relief. They end with a wound that closes but leaves a mark. Cassie didn't become the same person she was before. No one does. But she learned that pain with purpose is different from pain without direction. That intelligence and patience together reach places that anger alone never does. And that certain truths, no matter how much people try to bury them, always find a way to return to the surface. Always. If this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Tell me in the comments what you thought and which city or country you're watching from. It helps a lot and means that more stories like this will reach those who need to hear them.